Nexus PMG welcomes you to the Bigger Than Us podcast, which we as energy geeks lovingly refer to as the BTU. Bigger Than Us is a podcast that focuses on ideas that will shape the future of our planet and ultimately our existence. We will occasionally lean into energy topics because, after all, it's the key to our collective survival. But we'll also explore other ideas and topics that we believe will have an impact that is bigger than us. And now, on to today's show. Hello, and welcome to the Bigger Than Us podcast. I'm your host, Raj Daniels, and today I'd like to welcome Bruno Sarda to the show. Bruno Sarda is a leader in driving a sustainable future with more than a decade of sustainability leadership experience. As the president of CDP North America, he works to grow the organization and increase environmental disclosure and action among companies and local governments, as well as manage the North America team and operations. Previously, he served as Chief Sustainability Officer for NRG, a leading integrated power company, and has also worked at Dell and Charles Schwab. Bruno is a faculty member and Senior Sustainability Scholar at Arizona State University. Bruno, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Bruno, thank you for joining us. Bruno, where are you currently located?
I am in Princeton, New Jersey.
And how's the weather in Princeton?
You know, it's actually been quite lovely. Not quite as warm or humid as it is this time of year. So in these days when we're all kind of, stuck in or near our homes, it's been nice to be able to spend some time outside.
So getting the opportunity to get out and walk a little bit?
Walk, even ride my bike, and it's been, and even do a little bit of work in the garden. I don't have really green thumbs, but I try.
Well, good for you. Good for you. So, Bruno, I like to open my show by asking my guests the following question. If you were asked to share something interesting about yourself, what would it be?
Well, let's see. I've spent 2 weeks, 2 separate weeks, a few years apart, deep in the Amazon rainforest, and somewhat unusual experiences, but very, very formative, and very grateful for having had that opportunity.
And what did you do while you were down there?
You know, it was very kind of low tech exploration. That was basically part of bringing some sustainability leaders together to engage in both kind of reflection, leadership development, and better understanding of the kind of the interconnectedness that exists in the rainforest ecosystem, where literally, if you mess with one thing, you mess with everything. So everything exists in service of something else, and it's fascinating to be able to observe and learn from that.
So 2 things. First of all, when you said 2 weeks in the Amazon, interesting, I thought you were going to talk about ayahuasca. So, and the second thing reminds me of that quote by John Muir regarding the thread, and if you pull on it, everything unravels. So Appreciate you sharing that. Yes, absolutely. So can you give a brief overview of CDP?
Sure. So CDP, sometimes known as the Carbon Disclosure Project, that's what it was known for many of its years, is a nonprofit organization, actually turning 20 years old in 2020, and really created with kind of a singular idea to try to create a systemic link between environmental information and financial information, and to do so in order to inform financial decision making to shift capital in the direction of kind of a more climate safe, low carbon future. And so how we do that is we are basically the global disclosure platform for business or companies and cities around the world. So we have companies, in over 100 countries, representing over 50% of global market cap, doing voluntary, relatively detailed disclosures to CDP on climate change, water, and deforestation, and basically both how they're managing their impacts on the environment on those topics, but also how they're managing the impacts on their business of things like a changing climate or shifting water availability and erosion of forests. So I lead the CDP North America. We're based in New York. We have about 60 people or so engaging with four primary stakeholders: corporations, um, investors and the capital markets, investors, banks, hedge funds, etc., policymakers, and what we call C-star, or city, states, and regions. So anything smaller than a country. So we don't do any work at the kind of the national government level, but any subnational is where we operate.
And can you give some examples of the kinds of disclosures?
Yeah, so it's very kind of deep and narrow. So, for example, on the climate change disclosure, which is by far our, if you will, our flagship product, if you can call it that, it's companies are asked to disclose in great detail what they measure, what they manage, how they manage it, what goals they have, what mitigation strategies they have, how they're establishing governance. So a typical CDP disclosure could be, potentially dozens of pages with, both lots of numbers and lots of words. But it is by far the most comprehensive and frankly, really the only data set of its kind in the world that takes inventory, if you will, of what is business doing relative to climate change. Both, again, what is business doing to contribute less to the problem of climate change, and what is business doing to prepare for the impacts of climate change on business and its operations. So this could mean, anything from, depending, again, companies maybe in the power sector, it's about how they're decarbonizing their power generation. In the food sector, it's about how they're, looking at land use models, as well as, where they look to potentially grow their crops now and in the future, as well as their use of things like fresh water. Or so there's a wide range of things, but this informs a very rich data set that then is used by financial institutions all over the world to either kind of assess portfolio level risk, as well as potentially look for what they call alpha, or basically potential returns, because we score all of those disclosures to CDP, and the top 2% or so every year get what our A rating, so what we call our A list. And now for 7 straight years, A-listed companies have outperformed the broader stock market by an average of 5.5% a year for 7 straight years. So there's a clear correlation between, if you will, kind of leadership in the environmental space, or at least in this case, in the climate space, and financial returns in the stock market. So our investors are very interested in trying to understand through the data what that looks like, and are there any predictive natures to that. So we exist at the interface of business and finance primarily, and then also city and finance. All of these companies around the world that disclose to CDP do so on a voluntary basis. There's not a single jurisdiction in the world anywhere that requires this level of disclosure by law or by regulation. So all of this is voluntary, based on basically interest from the financial markets and from civil society to get this level of transparency from companies and from cities.
So you started by saying that the reports can be several pages long. Do you provide templates for the companies?
Yeah, so the CDP experience at its basis is a questionnaire. So every year we publish a questionnaire, and it's all made available to the public on our website. Anybody can go see what the questionnaire is. They can go see actually what most companies' responses then every year. If you wanted to know what what Apple or Google disclosed to CDP last year, you could go download that today. So it is a standardized questionnaire, so that by the time they responded to it, then it allows us to create a standardized data set with, after some data cleansing and whatnot, can then feed into all kinds of data management systems.
And who at these companies usually takes the time to do these questionnaires?
What's the role? It depends. Often the people who actually, if you will, kind of answer the questions in the questionnaire can be sometimes in the sustainability team, sometimes in corporate affairs and environmental health and safety, even sometimes in legal. But the responses have to come from across the company. So now you have to get responses that come out of your finance department, out of your risk department, out of your board, and your your corporate secretary, your C-suite, your strategy. So it's both kind of rear-looking and forward-looking. So it engages most parts of an organization, but if you will, the mechanics of collecting that information often flows back to the corporate sustainability team.
And you mentioned markets earlier. I read Larry Fink pass some comments earlier this week or late last week regarding some of the companies that BlackRock is looking at, and how these companies aren't perhaps living up to some of the standards that BlackRock's looking at. Who are the major consumers of your reports?
So we do both reports and, again, data sets. So a company like BlackRock and all the large asset managers use and consume our data. All the big kind of financial data or fintech companies, the Bloombergs, the S&P, the Moody's, the credit ratings, a lot of the financial media as well. And then a whole bunch of others. So whether it's for analysis to combine with other data sets to create bespoke data products for the insurance industry, certainly all environmental NGOs in some way or another rely on CDP data. Again, we're really the only organization that collects the information we collect. So nobody really has what we have. And so, but we're a nonprofit. That's why we exist, is to make that available and to promote its use. A lot of universities also use our data set to inform some of their research. We are a 501c3. We don't do any lobbying. We don't do any sort of trying to influence policy making, but we inform policymakers. We will present data or even testify to Congress. We were asked twice to testify to the Congress, the House Select Committee on Climate Change, that just published its report a couple of weeks ago. We were quoted in that. We are often asked to engage with individual legislators' offices to help them understand either impacts on their state or the businesses in their state. So we work with policymakers, not in a policy influencing role, but really in a kind of data sharing and education role.
Now, the companies that are submitting these reports voluntarily, obviously, they invest resources to fill out the questionnaire. So they have a strong belief in sustainability and want to show that they're doing the right thing. I've heard you in the past draw parallels between the internet and the sustainability movement. Can you share some of that with the audience?
Yeah, for me that was kind of my own pivot in my career. I spent the first 15 years or so of my career kind of at that bleeding edge of digital disruption. In the mid 90s, I joined actually Charles Schwab in the financial space, at a time when, we were trying to figure out, or the company was trying to figure out what the internet was going to do to business and whether it was really, meaningful. I mean, at the time, hardly anybody had a computer on their desk at the office. Hardly anybody had a computer in their house. Nobody really had meaningful access to the internet at home or at work. And so these were early days. And of course, we all know how that unfolded, and the internet changed everything about everything. And both, about how we communicate with each other in society, how we do our work. It transformed anything from, kind of logistics, supply chains, et cetera. And I think when we look back, and the companies that Schwab was actually a good example that, saw it kind of as a big disruptor, but saw this more as as an opportunity to try to wield that disruption better than its competitors, and emerged really as kind of the one of the leaders in the kind of transition to online brokerage. And we saw plenty of companies, and most notoriously in the music and movie business, who were deeply entrenched in trying to protect their business model and resisting the digitization of their business model, and really kind of refusing this reality that was in front of them, that was just not a fight they were going to win. And the early days of things like Napster and others, and now of course the biggest music and movie companies are things like Apple and Amazon and Netflix, and not the people who were leading in that business before. And so I think sustainability for me is very similar. It's this kind of, there's this big societal force for change that is coming at us, this big kind of cloud that's heading or has been heading now for a while in the way of business. And, some businesses, resisted the idea of change, saying, our job is to try to push that cloud away, as opposed to, recognizing this cloud is coming. It's going to change everything about everything. And it's really going to force us to kind of reinvent how we do what we do. I think what sometimes is called the fourth industrial revolution, or things like that, or the ushering in of the low carbon economy is perceived to potentially have as much of a societal impact on people, but also business, as the internet did. So I think we're in the middle of that.
So if you had the ear of some organizations or leaders that were on the fence, what would you say to them to convince them to go the route of Netflix and not Blockbuster?
For sure, partly is, I would say, again, don't listen to what you want to hear, but rather, kind of open yourself to what you're seeing. That the risks of inaction are great, and there's plenty of empirical data to show that. But the good news is that the benefits or the opportunities associated with the transition are tremendous. And again, this opportunity, especially in this country, where sometimes things like climate denialism and some of these things tend to be associated with a particular political movement or ideology. I think there's plenty to like for anybody here, that this is the opportunity for the United States to really cement a whole new era of innovation in clean tech, in renewable energy, in low carbon transportation, in all kinds of new systems that can be exported and both kind of improve the quality and the resiliency and the security of the U.S. infrastructure, but also create a commercial advantage and competitive advantage with other nations. The other thing I'd say to them is again, this isn't a government solution. I mean, look around, all the innovation, all of this groundswell is being driven by business. There's tremendously exciting things happening all around. And if all the captains of industry, maybe except in the coal and oil and gas sector, although there are some there, but almost every other sector now is rapidly embracing this transition. Again, look around and see, is there something there that you're not looking at with an objective set of eyes?
Well, I hope they listen to you. I'm going to switch gears a little bit here. The crux of our conversation is the why behind what you do. And you mentioned your beginnings with Schwab and where you started at, but what's your why? What's driven you to stay in this field of sustainability all these years, to the point where you've been teaching it too at ASU, I believe, for many years now?
I think my why, I mean, for sure, as a, if you will, as a global citizen, I grew up, was born and raised in France. I immigrated to the U.S. In my late teens. I've been fortunate to travel, in various parts of the world. I think the principles around sustainability, whether you look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals or other frameworks, are really about trying to bring humanity together, as opposed to not. And I'm very committed to that. That is a very strong part of my why, of finding ways for us to really find all that unites us, as opposed to all that divides us. And second, I think, is I've been fortunate again to spend most of my career at this interesting time of transitions, and even transformations, and recognizing the power that these transitions and transformations can yield, both in terms of these inflection points in kind of historical trends. I think it was Martin Luther King Jr. who said, the arc of history bends slowly, but in the direction of justice. And this idea of, okay, can we help bend the trends, a little bit faster than history would on its own? And so that's part of my why. Is, I think, this idea of looking at these disruptions, whether it's digital disruption, whether it's this low carbon disruption, not as a threat, but as an opportunity. And my work with corporations has been to help companies, again, see that and act on it. And then same with my teaching, is to help people who are interested in advancing their careers in this direction to maybe share some of the things that I've been fortunate to learn along the way.
So, where does your grounding in justice come from?
I'd have to, I think, give credit to my upbringing. I was fortunate again to be raised in kind of a multinational, multicultural environment. Again, French by birth, but my grandparents, my grandfather who fought in World War II for the French, but then had been prisoner of the Nazis for a while. He escaped. He finished the war under American command after World War II, was actually asked to go to Japan and be part of the reconstruction there and as part of the Marshall Plan. And so actually my mom grew up kind of mostly in Japan for most of her, youth. And I don't know, just this idea of, we're no matter what these points in time in the history books might tell us, again, most people around the world want the same things for themselves, for their kids, and I think we can see every day, including recently with some of some of the tragic events that we've seen with George Floyd and others, that this promise of a life that is can be fulfilled. This idea of the pursuit of happiness, equality, liberty is not equally experienced by everybody in the world, and I think it is everybody's work to ensure that happens. And in my own journey, recognizing as a Caucasian male, straight, those kinds of things, recognizing how many things I've been blind to in my upbringing, that I just didn't experience the kind of prejudice, the kind of suffering that others might have, and that it's part of my job to educate myself on what I have not personally experienced and do anything I can to help correct those over time.
I appreciate you sharing that. My own personal view is I feel that people like you and I who've had the pleasure or the privilege of being global citizens, being able to travel, have, since we've traveled, we've seen people from all different walks of life. And I feel like we do have a stronger grounding, especially when it comes to empathy and compassion for people of all kinds, races, and colors. What are your thoughts about that?
I fully agree. When I see some of the tension and the animosity and the division that exists in the US today, and then I see the statistic that I think, barely 10% of Americans have a passport. And that most of those who do, it's either to go, 50 miles inland, either into Mexico or Canada, and not really get to experience the culture of these countries as much as just to experience a little bit of their tourist or gambling facilities or whatever. I think it would be tremendous to have a some kind of national priority that let's try to get as many people to travel abroad as possible. I know back in the 80s, I think Japan had very much a program where they would subsidize their citizens travel abroad to really get them to experience the rest of the world and come back with new ideas. I think China's been doing that recently as well. And I think, any country that invests in its people's ability to go learn from others, not for the purposes of, stealing or whatever, but just to literally, this is how we understand each other. And I've never found anybody who traveled internationally and came back poorer for it.
I agree. So you've been on this journey in sustainability for about 20 years or so. What are some of the big lessons or takeaways you've learned on your journey?
I think first is as much as there are, very real things that matter, so climate science is real, and we need to keep, atmospheric concentrations of CO2 below a certain level. We need to keep, the warming of the atmosphere below a certain level. Things like, deforestation and the rate of deforestation. I mean, there's some very physical, natural boundaries to this world. I mean, after all, we are in a physical world, and that physical world has physical boundaries. But that beyond that, there's so much room for collaboration and innovation and coming together, so that it's not about pushing an ideology. It's not about pushing an agenda. It's not about forcing solutions. I'm always reminded I grew up, as I mentioned, French. One of my heroes growing up was Jacques Cousteau, who I thought, was a tremendous in the way he approached his craft. He was passionate about the oceans and, was very troubled by how much the oceans were being plundered and polluted. And he set out to change that. And the way he set out to change that is not by trying to make people change, but by trying to make people want to change. And by, in order to do that, he said, I have to make them fall in love with what I love. So he literally devoted his innovation, in inventing the aqualung, right? He literally holds the patent on the underwater breathing apparatus that is now basically the staple of any scuba diver. So how can I go underwater and breathe? Because he wanted to film what's underwater, and then invented basically some of the first underwater cameras to be able to do that. So, this fascinating approach to starting with this goal of, I want to protect the oceans. I need more people to want to do that too, not by force, but by will. And then I'm going to innovate my way into making that possible. So I think this idea of, it's all about the hows, right? So how do we get to what we want? It's less about pushing some very specific, rigid ideas or goals, but trying to really solidify around a set of principles, around a set of values, around a set of shared ideals. Because then it becomes easier to disagree about the hows, and then we can just we can compromise on the hows. And I think of things like universal healthcare in the U.S., which has become controversial, but it's like, if we could all agree that what we want is universal healthcare, and then let's talk about how we get to that, as opposed to disagree on whether we want that or not. So I think that's certainly what I've learned, is when you can get to the how conversation, you're 80% of the way there. If you're trying to get to the if conversation, that's often when you run into roadblocks. And then I think what I've learned, frankly, in my own leadership journey is, I think, again, you kind of point the way and clear the path. So, really try to kind of point the way again, without necessarily trying to define in my own ways what the destination is, or how fast we should get there, or what it should look like, but rather just we need to head in this direction, again, in this arc, I think, that MLK Jr. referred to. And then clear the path, just be this enabler, be this champion, be this kind of, if you will, vanguard of kind of making it possible, reduce the friction, so that make it easy to say yes for whether it's for corporate leaders, for boards of directors, for investors, to say yes. Okay, like, this makes sense. It feels a little bit less risky, a little bit easier, a little bit more attainable. Let's go, test some things. And so just clear, point the way and clear the path. And I found that that has served me well.
So, what about aha surprise moments? Anything surprised you in your journey?
I would say, and you mentioned earlier in the conversation our common friend Park Howell, who's been also very much an inspiration for me in his own transformation in his career, by really understanding and wielding and ultimately codifying the power of story and the power of narratives and the power of framing. And I've always been very comfortable as very much of a kind of a left brain kind of guy with facts and data and process and structures. And because I find it's easier to manage that way. But I think some of the aha moments is when I really just trust in this idea of the power of compelling narratives, the power, again, of really describing these shared ideals or these desired outcomes or this kind of these futures we want, and how much that can inspire action at a whole new level. Kind of like if I describe a beautiful destination, maybe a tropical island, and all the reasons why we would want to go there and really make it kind of feel so nice. And then I say, oh, and by the way, in order to get there, we have to go to a bunch of airports, take a bunch of crowded planes, take off our shoes a bunch of times, eat bad food, pay for overpriced water. But we're still stuck on but we are going to do all those things because we're going to get to this beautiful destination. As opposed to if I said, okay, here's what international travel is going to feel like, and not take the time to really create that narrative and that framing around the destination, then the journey would sound a lot less palatable. So anyway, maybe not a super useful example, but that's, I think for me, that's been my aha, is really to take the time to, again, kind of engage the imagination about not just the journey, but the destination a little bit, or at least the direction, this pointing the way of why do we want to go in that direction? What's better about it? Why is that better for everyone? And then talk about how we get there.
So it sounds like you've become quite a beautiful vision painter. Magic wand, 5 years from now, what does the future hold for CDP? What does it look like?
Ooh, I think there's so many things. I mean, obviously, 5 years from now, about 2025, we're in a race against the clock here. I mean, a lot of the important milestones we care about at CDP have very important kind of checkpoints at 2030. It's the target year for the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. It's the halfway point to the Paris Accord on climate change and needing to have reduced global emissions by 50% by then. And right now, the trajectory is not good. We're not, heading in the right direction. By 2025, we need to have really bent that trajectory so that we're on course for, again, the achievement of the interim milestone for the Paris Accord. We're on course to the achievement of those 17 sustainable development goals that I really think of as kind of humanity's wish list, about if all these things were achieved, 17 goals, about 168 targets or so. Here's my data side coming out, as you can tell. Everybody would be better off in this world, and not just people, but nature and wildlife, and it would be a good place to be. So I think for us, that's our challenge: is how do we keep doing more of what we do? How do we, expand our scope and our pace and our reach in ways that allows us to achieve that kind of scale and that kind of trajectory in an accelerated fashion, so that by 2025 we feel good about the potential of achieving 2030. Again, it doesn't have to be easy. This stuff is not easy, and it's okay that it's hard, but we want to give ourselves as many chances as we can.
Well, I love the idea of humanity's wish list, and staying with that for a moment. Earlier, you shared some advice for leadership in companies regarding becoming a Netflix, not a Blockbuster. But if you could share some advice or words of wisdom with the audience as individuals, what would it be?
Something I've been tapping into lately is, and again, I'm, also with young, less young, college age kids, but is I think, telling people and reminding people to believe in yourself, even if oftentimes you're made to question that, but really believe in yourself, but also believe in others. Again, as I look around, even among people who disagree about lots of things and who think those disagreements define them, the fact is, we're all the same. We all want very similar things, and let's give each other the benefit of the doubt. Let's trust in each other's humanity. Let's try to bring out each other's humanity as opposed to suppress it. We truly are all in this together. Some like to say there is no planet B, but it's not just about the planet. It's not about, national borders. It's not about these kinds of things. It's, let's really try to activate the best in everyone that we touch. And if we can do that for each other, I think we'll all be better off.
Well, Bruno, I think that's a great place to end it. Believe in yourself. Is there something I should have asked you that I have not?
No, I think we covered a good amount of ground. This was fun.
Appreciate your time, Bruno, and I look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you like our show, please give us a rating and review on iTunes. And you can show your support by sharing our show with a friend or reach out to us on social media, where you'll find us under our Nexus PMG handle. If there's a subject or topic you'd like to hear about, send me an email, btu@nexuspmg.com, or contact me via our website, nexuspmg.com. And while you're there, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter, where we share what we're reading and thinking about in the clean tech, green tech sectors. Bigger Than Us is a Nexus PMG production.